Today's chat is brought to you by, well, all of your support. Through the patronage you provide the Focus Fire chat team through Podbean's crowdfunding, we are able to provide you with the weekly podcast as well as the website and other aspects of Focus Fire chat. If you have any interest in becoming a patron of the FFC, please be sure to visit our website and click on the support link. Even a single dollar helps, and for those of you who are already patrons, thank you again for your generosity.
Welcome to Focus Fire Chat. Explore together.
Welcome to Focus Fire Chat, recorded live on December 20th, 2019 over on twitch.tv/FocusFireChat as we continue our discussion over the lore book Unveiling. This particular episode will serve as what we have come to call the advanced session of the week's exploration. Congratulations to those who signed up for a deeper dive. Before we go any further, however, let's run through a quick introduction of who all we have with us on the show. As always, this is your host, Blue Crew 86.
And this is the avatar of the holidays, green-eyed music lover.
And this is, once again, the notorious NobleMansRose.
Nice.
I couldn't think of anything else on the spot.
That's the reason. There's a reason I just feel like this is me. Oh man. Well, I guess enough with chatter. Let's just jump back into it. For us, this is like 10 minutes after we just got done with the intro. For everyone else, it's like 4 days. But, let's just get right to it. Where do we want to pick up from the not so intro session?
So we did a lot in the intro session. Wow. Of discussing the concepts around it and the fact that it is very philosophy heavy within this book, but we didn't really dive into the cards themselves. Do you want to spend a little bit more time kind of debating and discussing the cards in this session?
Yeah.
Is more.
I think that's fair. I think the advanced session to me is where that kind of fits more because we kind of
the nitty gritty.
So you want to talk about Pleased to Meet You?
Yeah, I'm gonna read it.
Nice.
Pleased to meet you. One of your philosophers said, It is not to be thought that the life of darkness is sunk in misery and lost in sorrow. There is no sorrow, for sorrow is a thing that is swallowed up in death, and death and dying are the very life of the darkness. He was a shoemaker. He was right, and it matters more than anything. According to him, the visible world is a manifestation of eternal light and eternal darkness, and it is in eternal opposition that eternity has revealed itself. The fall was necessary for creation to escape its first imperfect stasis and seek a truer form. Heresy? Well, then I am a heresiarch. The philosopher died of a bowel disease. Those who do not exist cannot suffer and are of no account to any viable ethics. If the true path to goodness is the elimination of suffering, then only those who must exist can be allowed to exist. It is the nature of life to favor existence over non-existence, and to prefer the fertile soil to the poisoned wind, because those who open their mouths to that wind pass from the world and leave no descendant, whether of flesh or of thought. But imagine the abomination of a world where nothing can end and no choice can be preferred to any other. Imagine the things that would suffer and never die. Imagine the lies that would flourish without context or corrective. Imagine a world without me. So, Pleased to Meet You is like any good evil character in a movie. It's his opening introduction of who he is when you first see him kind of thing. At least that's my narrative interpretation of it in some respects. It's the, I am here and I am important, and let me tell you why I'm important, because I am here and you need me. Now let me tell you my whole plan, because that's going to come next. Thoughts?
Oh, I have thoughts.
I'm going to kind of go off of one of the big things that stuck out to me throughout this whole book. The idea that it is an argument essay, something presented to our guardian to convince them of this idea. And I think in this opening chapter, he is the darkness is relating its ideas, its philosophies, to a very human, physical philosopher. He is humanizing his point of view, and then saying that even the philosopher is subject to this disease, to the laws that he is talking about. And then he brings that back to himself. He says, this is all about me.
I mean, he's I don't know if it's all about him, but he's definitely, in some respects, at least in his perspective, is a requirement for the life, or for the continuance of existence, because and this is a slightly Buddhist thought, to be honest, to understand happiness, you have to know suffering. So you have to understand that there is suffering to gain happiness, and that the too much happiness can lead to also more suffering. And it's just that balancing act that you see there. Blue, jump off of that a little bit?
Yeah. So, you're talking about the Buddhism. That reminds me of the rice painting of the Buddha, Confucius, and Taoist tasting vinegar. It's a really cool, I think it's called Vinegar Tasters, if I remember right.
I think so.
It's really interesting. But no, so actually I wanted to take a couple minutes, and I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent for the quote that was used there. So the quote that Green mentioned at the very beginning there, with it is not to be thought that the life of darkness is sunk in misery and lost in sorrow. There is no sorrow, for sorrow is a thing that is swallowed up in death, and death and dying are the very life of the darkness. This actually is a quote taken from a philosopher, a Lutheran theologist, and a Christian mystic who went by the name of Jacob Boehme. And this quote is actually taken from his work that is titled 6 Theosophic Points, and is related specifically to his 6th point, which discusses how the life of darkness is repugnant to that of the life of light. So he was very dichotomy. It was very, very balanced, which kind of ties into the whole thing. And this stems from the fact that darkness is being a giver of what's referred to as fierce and hostile essence, whereas the light gives the essence of love. And so the quote that this is actually taken part of is I'm going to read the full passage that this is from, because there's a lot of context that strangely gets missed when you take a single line out of an entire passage. So Boehme says, the life of darkness is repugnant to all life of light, for the darkness gives fierce and hostile essence, and the life of light gives love essence. In the darkness there is in the essence only a perpetual stinging and breaking, each form being enemy to the other, a contrarious essence. Each form is a liar to itself, and one says to the other that it is evil and adverse to it, that it is a cause of its restlessness and fierceness. Each thinks in itself, if only the other form were not, thou wouldst have rest. And yet each of them is evil and false. Hence it is that all that is born of the dark property of wrath is lying, and is always lying against the other forms, saying they are evil, and yet it is itself a cause thereof. It makes them evil by its poisonous infection. Thus are they all, and lying is their truth. When they speak lies, they speak from their own forms and properties, and so also are their creatures. For each form desires to murder the other, and yet there is no killing. But the greater the strife is, the greater becomes their murderous life. And therefore it is called an eternal death and enmity, where nothing but contrariety arises. For there is nothing that would abolish the strife, nothing that could hold in check a single form. The more it were resisted, the greater would be the fierceness, like a fire that is stirred, whereby it burns but the more. Thus the fierce, wrathful kingdom can be extinguished by nothing save only by God's light, by which it becomes wholly gentle, lovely, and full of joy. And neither can that be, for if the dark kingdom were to be kindled with the light would have no root to its nature and property. No fire could be generated, neither were there any light nor any power, but all were a nothing. And that's the end of that passage. And so Boehme goes on to explain, in keeping with the Lutheran theology and the Christian mystical philosophies that he was a very staunch follower of, that, quote, for every life is rooted in poison. The light alone resists the poison, yet is a cause that the poison lives and faints not, end quote. So what this all does is this is connected back to that concept that is expressed by Ulantan in the Symmetry. Within the universe of Destiny, we kind of have this idea that we can't have light without the darkness, which we talked about in the intro session. And the Symmetry holds that in destroying the darkness, we would also destroy or sacrifice the light. And there's also the potential issue that we would potentially destroy everything else along with it. And so the other thing that, like, when I was reading the 6 Theosophic points to try to get a feel for, where this kind of fits, the other thing that this passage that I just quoted really kind of, to me, screams is this is the worm gods and hive. There's multiple points that align with the hive's transformation from the krill. We have the living in the darkness, the property of wrath, the lies of the honest worm Yule, saying it is evil, saying the others are evil, yet it is the cause of its evil. For each form desires to murder the other, and yet there is no killing. That doesn't sound like the hive at all. And for greater the strife, the greater becomes their murderous life. So the more they kill, but they don't kill, the more powerful they become. It's the sword logic, basically, at this point. And you see that with the more it was resisted, the greater would be the fierceness. The rat, and this whole thing just stems from that concept, which makes it interesting when he goes on, or they go on to say that he was right, and it matters more than anything about the quote that they mention here. Because if they are saying that Boehme was right and they're doubling down on that fact, then you have to take into account the contextual presence of the other aspects of Boehme's work within the 6 Theosophic points, and that ties into the idea that there is a dichotomical balance between the darkness and the light. And Boehme goes on to describe this darkness as the equivalent of hell and the home realm of Satan and the demons and all that, whereas the life of light is paradise, the angels, the archangels, and all that. It ties back into Christian mysticism, Lutheran theology. A lot of it was very influential to his work, but the context that is missed by that single quote is that he's saying that there is no sorrow, for sorrow is a thing that is swallowed up in death, and blah blah blah. Basically, this is a necessity. That's not actually what the message is from Boehme's work. There's a component that is kind of true there, but it's not something to be embraced. It's something that is just there and it needs to be acknowledged. But I think that there's a lot that is deliberately misleading with this particular intro quote, and that's the beginning of the rabbit hole that I went down this week, was because I was like, Green can attest to that. I was like, oh my gosh, there are so many connections. Like, there are so many connections here. But yeah,
it's like this is opening up a whole new venture for us.
For the clarification
in the lore,
this was Seth's work, right? Did Seth do Unveiling? I want to say he did.
I want to say yes, but I don't know for sure. I cannot confirm that.
But because I remember him saying something, because Unveiling was the one that in game was released by Drip Feed, right?
He was the Right, and he was the most excited because it did not get spoiled.
Right. Okay.
So I would say that based off of those tweets, this is probably his book.
It also has a flavor of Seth's writing, like the nuanced meanings hidden between each other. That's very, very similar to his other stuff that he has done for Destiny. So that's why I was just curious.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's my tangent for that one.
All right. Nobleman, do you want to dive into that anymore, or?
I think just closing on that, I think with everything that Blue has said, that you begin to really see how the darkness is using these philosophies and to present them to us. He's taken that little bit that really fits his narrative in his argument.
Okay. Nice. Well, then do you want to take over and read The Gardener and Winnower?
Sure.
Yes, I want to hear your reading style.
Once upon a time, a gardener and a winnower lived together in a garden. It was once before a time, because time had not yet begun. We did not live. We existed as principles of ontological dynamics that emerged from mathematical structures as bodiless and inevitable as the primes. It was the field of possibility that prefigured existence. They existed because they had to exist. They had no antecedent, no constituents, and there is no instrument of causality by which they could be portioned into components and assigned to some schematic of their origin. If you followed the umbilical of history in search of some ultimate aviistic embryo that became them, you would end your journey marooned here in this garden. In the morning, the gardener pushed seeds down into the wet loam of the garden to see what they would become. In the evening, the winnower reaped the day's crop and separated what would flourish from what had failed. The day was longer than all of time, and the night was swifter than a glint of light on a falling sugar crystal. Insects buzzed between the flowers, and worms slithered between the roots, feeding on what was and what might be, the first gradient in existence, the first dynamo of life. Rain fell from no sky. Voices spoke without mouth or meaning. A tree of silver wings bloomed, yielded fruit, shed feathers, bloomed again. In the day, between the morning and the evening, the gardener and the winnower played a game of possibilities.
So, before the Big Bang, the day was longer than all of time and the night was swifter than a glint of light. That line itself is probably one of my favorites in this card in general, just because it paints a very interesting picture that so much, and it depends if you're taking the poetic stance of light being the amount of change happening and darkness being the amount of entropy or the amount of reversal or culling or winnowing at that point. So much change was happening here that they needed to establish the rules before they actually played the game to make things more balanced. And they played a game of probabilities. Blue, I know you're going to have thoughts on this one too. Yeah, I already saw some of yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this one actually, this was a really good conversation that I saw over on the Destiny Lore subreddit. And it's talking about the importance of the terminology of gardener and winnower and some of the ramifications that they can posit within, the game as we have, as we've experienced it. And this is from a user who I love the name. It's both so good and so funny at the same time. Sun Tzu 420. Excellent name. I love it. I saw it. I'm like, oh God, this is amazing. They say that in the gardener stands the gardener and the winnower. The gardener plants the garden. He feeds the seeds, plants them, waters them. The winnower watches the garden as it grows. He sees both that which is desirable and undesirable. The winnower then begins to take the most undesirable pieces from the garden, leaving only the most desired plants. If we equate the light to the gardener and the darkness to the winnower, who is really evil in this scenario? The light comes to a species, bestows great power and knowledge. The light watches as the species grows. Now the darkness arrives, and with it death. The death that the darkness brings isn't to destroy the species, but to cull the undesirable parts and leave only the best. In my opinion, this is why the darkness has come back. We are the flowers in the garden, and the gardener watched us flourish for many reasons, or many seasons. Now the winnower has arrived to prune the garden so that only the most desirable plants are left. And I might be completely off base here, but this was kind of the first thing that came to me after reading this lore entry. And something to consider is that to winnow also means to use wind or breath to separate chaff from the grain. Wind is shapeless, and maybe to be shapeless is the final form. Yes.
But as we learned in the first card, the wind is poisoned, or at least that reference, the wind is poisoned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I mean... Yeah. So it
depends if they're connecting the references.
Right. Yeah. And so the reason that this kind of stood out to me was like, this would explain the collapse, where it's noticed that the darkness, and I mentioned this in the intro session, the darkness had the ability to completely eradicate humanity, but for some reason it didn't.
The darkness is Thanos.
Yeah. Well, Thanatos, but yes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and yes and no. Because it's more intellectual. Anyways, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because that paints the collapse more as a culling than an extermination process, which does follow more in line with what the winnower is meant to do. And then Sun Tzu actually goes on to then present the idea that, quote, in order for a gardener to be a gardener, it has to have a garden first. The gardener finds earth, finds that it is suitable, and begins the task of planting the garden. Before you can plant anything in the garden, it has to be prepared first. As part of this preparation, humanity was given vast knowledge and technology. This was the gardener preparing the garden. We prospered under this age, but the winnower still needs to help the gardener get the garden ready by removing anything that isn't desirable in the garden, which was the collapse. I believe that when the garden is prepared, this is when the game of possibilities begin. Now that the garden is ready, the gardener begins to seed the garden, create and send out ghosts in hopes that the new flowers, the risen or the guardians, would be grow or found. Now that the garden has flourished, the winnower, i.e. the darkness, has come to reap the harvest and separate what has flourished from what has failed. Since we are what has flourished, the darkness is coming to separate us from what has failed. This is why it's telling us that it is our salvation. Without the winnower in the garden, we would be left to rot like everything else. End quote.
That I like quite a bit because it pushes our timeline so much further forward than the Big Bang.
Yeah, I like the theory. I have a few qualms about the connections because, again, the timeline that is presented in Unveiling seems to point that some of this happened before creation. So it's just like it fits.
Or if it was just before our creation.
Yeah, like it's one of those things where it's like I like the theory. I really like this theory. I haven't quite married it up perfectly with what my understanding of what I read was as far as like timing. So it's still kind of I'm still kind of jostling it with that component, but I really like that theory. I really do think that this Sun Tzu 420 from Destiny, again, this is the Destiny lore subreddit. I think they're onto something. Like I really like it. I just need to figure out how to rectify it with my understanding.
Right. Nice. Well, do we have any more thoughts on this one before we move to the actual flower game itself, which we've kind of discussed once before?
We've discussed this, yeah.
I think we're ready to play a game.
Let's play a game, Guardians. The flower game. These are the rules of a game. Let it be played upon an infinite two-dimensional grid of flowers. Rule 1. A living flower with less than 2 living neighbors is cut off. It dies. Rule 2. A living flower with 2 or 3 living neighbors is connected. It lives. Rule 3. A living flower with more than 3 living neighbors is starved and overcrowded. It dies. Rule 4. A dead flower with exactly 3 living neighbors is reborn. It springs back to life. The only play permitted in the game is the arrangement of the initial flowers. This game fascinates kings. This game occupies the very emperors of thought. Though it has only 4 rules and the board is flat, featureless grid. In it you will find changeless blocks, stoic as iron and beacons and whirling pulsars, as well as gliders that soar out to infinity and patterns that lay eggs and spawn other patterns, and living cells that replicate themselves wholly. In it, you may construct a universal computer with the power to simulate, very slowly, any other computer imaginable and thus simulate whole realities, including nested copies of the flower game itself. And the game is undecidable. No one can predict exactly how the game will play out, except by playing it. And yet, this game is nothing compared to the game played by the gardener and the winnower. It resembles that game as a seed does a flower. No, as a seed resembles the star that fed the flower and all the life that made it. In their game, the gardener and the winnower discovered shapes of possibility. They foresaw bodies and civilizations, minds and cognitions, qualia and suffering. They learned the rules that governed which patterns would flourish in the game and which would dwindle. They learned those rules because they were those rules. And in time the gardener became vexed. I like how this card talks about the vex in general. Like, I know we get that line at the end that the gardener became vexed, but there's a direct call out to the idea of the vex in this card. In so much as it says, in it you may construct a universal computer with the power to simulate very slowly any other computer imaginable and thus simulate whole realities, including nested copies of the flower game itself, aka the vex.
Sorry. All I can think of all I can think of is the computer from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
What's the answer?
I just want to see the pot of flowers.
42. What was it? Deep Thought? Was that the one?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god. Yeah, the ultimate question of life.
Yes. Blue and I have talked about this one quite a bit and discussed the idea of the flower game, or actually, what was it called originally, Blue? Do you remember?
Conway's Game of Life.
Conway's Game of Life.
Excuse me. It is also called out in Tyrannicide 1 by Marasov. And then I want to say someone mentioned, I can't remember who mentioned it, but there's like a glide. It's called a glider. There's a glider on Eris Morn's stand. There's an actual call out to that too. So.
Oh, really?
I think one of the big standouts to me is how the darkness is starting to go into, or maybe he does quite a bit in the previous chapter, but there is a lot of metaphor and double meaning in this chapter, and a lot of things that start to call into question the reliability of this. Of course, in-game, Eris is constantly telling you not to trust anything that he says, but I think one of the things that is the example here is the flower game itself. I have a friend who, at 14 years old, he programmed a copy of this game. So with that information, it tells me this is something very simple, something we humans can understand. And yet the darkness is like, but this is nothing compared to what the gardener and I play. You know, this is just a simple example so that you can grasp the gravity of all of this. These are fundamental rules of the universe at stake here.
it's fundamental rules of the universe because they are the rules. The writer calls out that they are the rules themselves, that they are not necessarily the forces, but they're the actions. They're the adjectives, I guess, rather, or the verbs, or my English. I was not an English person in high school or college for that matter, but they're the ones who are moving. They are the movers. I guess that is the easiest way for me to say it, of everything. So with the gardener and the winnower being the movers of everything, can you define them because they are the movers? Can you define the actions? We're creating we're humanizing the movements of this. But I ramble a little bit. Shall we move forward?
Yes.
Blue?
Sorry. I'm poking chat right now. Sorry.
I see that. I was just like, okay.
Black flag. Why? Oh, I'm a bad person. The final shape. And
I'm going to tell the podcast listeners why you just broke it. So he typed in chat, an egg can hold an elephant. Thank you very much.
Reference above. Okay, so Wicked is saying the most survivable patterns are often built on the simplest structure. And then Black Flag responds with, triangles support the most weight by design. Wicked agrees with that. And then they're like, hi, blah, blah, blah. And then that's when I'm like, an egg can hold an elephant. Thank you very much.
It's true. Like physics-wise, it can. But as far as structures within our own world, the idea of building with triangles is most commonly used in architecture. You cannot create a perfect circle in the reality of what we live in right now.
Right, yeah.
There are some spheres that get really stinking close, but you cannot create a perfect circle right now.
The best example I've seen of a perfect circle was on a SpongeBob episode, if any of y'all remember that one, but
SpongeBob. It's been a while. It has really been a while with that one.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if we move on past the flower game to the final shape, who wants to read this one?
I can. I can try at least. The final shape. It always ends the same, the gardener complained. This one stupid pattern. Aren't they beautiful? I asked, as the flowers opened and closed in patterns beyond the scope of entire universes to encode, all-devouring and perhaps everlasting. Not even we could know whether a pattern in the flowers would cycle forever or someday halt. They're as dull as carbon monoxide poisoning, the gardener groused, although carbon monoxide did not yet exist, and neither did anything that could be poisoned. The gardener kneeled to flick a patch of sod with their trowel. It struck an open flower, causing it to shut. Although I was the closer of flowers and that was my sole purpose, I felt no fear or jealousy. We had our assigned dominions and always would. They're majestic, I said. They have no purpose except to subsume all other purposes. There is nothing at the center of them except the will to go on existing, to alter the game to suit their existence. They spare not one sliver of their totality for any other work. They are the end. The pattern corrected the errant flower effortlessly. The great flow went on unchanged. The gardener got up and brushed their knees. Every game we play, this one pattern consumes all the others, wipes out every interesting development. A stupid, boring exploit that cuts off entire possibility spaces from ever arising. There's so much that we'll never get to see because of this pest. They chewed at their cracked lip, which existed only because this is an allegory. I'm going to do something about it, they said. We need a new rule.
Do you think that the gardener basically breaks the rule by creating the new rule? I know we're going to kind of get into that with the first knife as well, but
I think this shows the idea of chaos versus order, really. One thing that I did see a couple people kind of call out was the fact that the gardener apparently does have the capacity to kill, with the whole thing with the flower, which was interesting, like, because it's called out rather overtly that the winnower was supposed to be the closer of flowers. The gardener was not the closer of flowers, but the gardener is able to close flowers. Like it seems like that was it was just an odd little thing, and a lot of people kind of focused on that for various reasons. But I did find that kind of interesting. The other thing is like, you know, again, going back to the game of life and everything like that. I don't know, like this is definitely the bias of the winnower, but like the gardener just seems petulant. Like they get bored easily. And that's where, again, I don't know if that's bias or if that's, you know, because the winnower is like, you know, structured order, you know, this is what this is, and then the gardener is more of like the creative, you know, it's the difference between a left mind and a right mind, you know, it's like the creative, like like all over the place, and then you have the more organized, like, no, this needs to fall within this thing. Yeah, Black Flag Talk says that right now. So the question I have with this is, if you think about the rules itself, the only moves permissible is the placement of the flowers, right? That's the initial placement of the flowers. The basic, correct. That's the only move that you can make legally within Game of Life. Yeah, it's like, and that's the gardener's thing, like, right. So which winnower is just the rules. Yeah, I was going to say, which indicates that there's not actually two entities. Correct. There's only one. Yeah. And so,
I was just gonna say, I think one of the interesting parts about this is when I was reading it, the gardener comes off like a whiny child. You know, you teach a kid how to play a game, a card game, a board game, and they're upset that they're losing because they either don't know the rules or don't want to play by them, or they want to make up their own rules. Yeah, they want to make up their own rules, and the gardener sounds like a child in this particular chapter. Probably why I picked up on that, because that totally never ever happens. Like Minion, like Minion does this all the time. I don't want to play it this way. I want to play it my way. I'm like, oh, jeez. All right, which to be fair, anyone with a like 8 and below, this tends to be kind of the thing, like, but his, like, and he's gotten better with it, but like, especially when he was like 4 and 5, they were like just overt rules of, no, I win. Like, it's like, you know, that whole thing, it's the focus of winning. See, that's an interesting idea from Black Flag, that they were the same thing at this point. Yeah, I can see that. That has also dangerous ramifications in my brain. Oh, yes. That's interesting. I like that idea. How far up am I going to have to scroll to find what Black Flag is talking about? The very last one. It's at the bottom. He says they're at one point with the same being. They are or at one point. Or at one point. Which, I mean, goes back to the idea that the gardener is a creative mind and the winnower is the analytical mind. Like, it's, you know, technically you have a left brain or left hemisphere, right hemisphere argument with the brain. Well, it's the idea of the rules being enforced once the rules are set. Thing is that the gardener, and if the gardener and the winnower are one being at this point, that the fact that the gardener basically hacked itself into breaking its own rules in some respect, making it to where it's going to have to balance it out somehow with the other half by creating other rules or creating other aspects that are going to balance it out. Because it's cheating. It's cheating itself. Yep. And when you indulge in too much, something wrong happens oftentimes. Yep. And it would, to be fair, it's also not the first time that something psychological could be brought into Destiny.
I mean, geez, the whole thing with the three queens is a huge nod potentially to psychoanalytical thought between the ego, the id, and the superego. There's a pretty close correlation between the three queens and the three components within early psychoanalytical models. But do I talk about the first knife?
Mm-hmm. Let's do it. Nobleman,
I would
you
love
do that one.
to do this one.
Yes, absolutely.
I looked up in shock. I said, "What? What do you mean? A special new rule? Something to..." The gardener threw up their hands in exasperation. "I don't know. To reward those who make space for new complexity? A power that helps those who make strength from heterodoxy and who steer the game away from gridlock? Something to ensure there's always someone building something new. It'll have to be separate from the rest of the rules, running in parallel, so it can't be compromised, and we'll have to be very careful, so it doesn't disrupt the whole game. All you will do," I said, rising panic, fury, "is delay the dominant pattern that will overrun the others. It is inevitable. One final shape. No, it'll be different. Something will be different. Everywhere you look. Everything will be the same. Your new rule will only make great false cysts of horror, full of things that should not exist, that cannot withstand existence, that will suffer and scream as their rich blisters fill with effluent and rot around them. And when they pop, they will blight the whole garden. Whatever exists, because it must exist, and because it permits no other way of existence, has the absolute claim to existence. That is the one law." "No," the gardener said. "I am the growth and preservation of complexity. I will make myself into a law in the game." And thus the two became parts of the game. And the laws of the game became gnomic and open to change by our influence. And I had only one purpose and one principle in the game. And I could do nothing but continue to enact that purpose, because it was all that I was and ever would be. I looked at the gardener. I looked at my hands. I discovered the first knife.
I think this is the split. If Black Flag is right in chat, where they were at some point or are still currently two entities, this is the split. This is the breaking off, where one discovers that they need to continue to be the winnower. It's not just rules anymore, it's a physical manifestation of, I have to go out there and enact it. It's almost like an evolution.
Yes. It also makes me, again, think of the sins of Kurad Tan. Just the stone dagger from Taken King. Says, "For you are not the first hero, nor even Oryx the first villain, to meet upon this plane." And yes, also chat's talking about that also, as from a psychological component, correlates with the idea of a psychological break. If your very existence and very definition of what makes you is threatened, that is where you can have a splintering of or creation of sub-personalities or differential dissociative identity disorder and stuff like that.
Nobleman, you want to dive into this one a little bit deeper, since it's almost your favorite card in my opinion, the way you've talked about it so far?
I love and you could probably hear it in my voice, but the rising tension. The darkness is getting angrier and angry at everything the light is saying, and the light's getting excited about everything it wants to do to mess with the game. And there's just the rising conflict that is so permeable throughout this chapter is just got me excited about it. And that climax of the knife. I tell you, when I first read this chapter, when it became available in game, I was already ready for the next week. Like, I want to know, what's he about to do with this knife?
Okay. P53. Thank you for making room in your life for another talking ball. Let me ask you a question. In the 3 billion base pairs of your root species genome, there is a single gene that codes for a protein called P53. The name is a mistake. The protein weighs only as much as 47,000 protons, not 53,000. If you were a cell, you would think P53 was a mistake too. It has several coercive functions: to delay the cell's growth, to sterilize the cell when it is old, and to force the cell into self-destruction if it becomes too independent. Would you tolerate a bomb in your body waiting to detonate if you deviate from the needs of society? However, without P53 as an enforcer, the body's utopian surplus of energy becomes a paradise for cancer. Cells cannot resist the temptation to steal from that surplus. Their genetic morality degrades as a tumor suppressor. Genes fail. The only way to stop them is by punishment. You now confront the base problem of morality. It is the alignment of individual incentives with the global needs of the structure. Patterns will participate in a structure only if participation benefits their ability to go on existing. The more successful the structure grows, the more temptation occurs to cheat, and the greater the advantage the cheaters gain over their honest neighbors, and the greater the ability they develop to capture the very laws that should prevent their selfishness. To prevent this, the structure must punish cheaters with a violence that grows in proportion to its own success. My question follows. Is P53 an agent of the darkness or the light?
All right. This one was a big one for me right after that first knife. Going back to my idea that this whole lore book is an argument essay. It's building tension throughout the chapters. And then right after you hear about that knife, that hint of violence, the darkness stops itself here and sort of preemptively explains its actions, explains why its actions are so drastic in this circumstance. It relates, once again, its metaphorical actions to a very human idea, going to protons, at, very physical parts of our everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that structuring, once again, allows us to grasp why this whole book exists, what the darkness is trying to accomplish in its messages to you.
Well, I mean, it's planting the seeds of doubt in this card. Pure and simple. It is forcing you to think about things that may not necessarily be something that's comfortable. And with that, I unleash the blue. Release the Kraken!
I'm going back to the fact that you can't put morality on that.
I realize that, but it is literally just a metaphor.
No, I know. It's
I understand that you have
It's a terrible metaphor.
Issues with the metaphor, and I realize the reasoning behind your anger about the metaphor, but it is a metaphor.
Well, and I guess I'm trying to.
It's the situation that this card is setting up, that the greater advantage the cheaters gain over the honest neighbors and the greater the ability, there's the morality of that, the fact that there must be a balance to propagate, to continue in some way, shape, or form. Now, the overabundance of something, the idea that there are way too many women and not enough men in a society, the breeding will still continue. Mm-hmm. They're probably, I'm trying to think if there's a movie that this literally happens in. It is the plot of the movie. It's like a 70s film.
Well, I guess to kind of boil down my dislike of this is I can't help but see the slippery slope that this starts.
Oh, absolutely. But that's the point of it. It's supposed to create one.
Right. Which is why it's very frustrating, because this is, I mean,
sorry.
No. That's not at you. That's my brain immediately jumping to that's like, I immediately jump to see, okay, this argument here, when you start saying that
I like this card for its function within the book.
Right.
Regardless of the self-contained unit of the card.
And that's where I'm diverging, is because the self-contained issue of this card is, in my mind, problematic, because it's not axiomatic as far as my problem is that it's not self-sustainable within itself. And so then when you start using it to defend other aspects of the book, I start finding holes in logic. But that's the point of the card. It's to create, it's a false logic. Right, it's not
That's fair. A solid logical argument. And it's the creation of a slippery slope for which our guardians should start to slide down the path that the winnower is guiding us towards.
That's fair.
Oh, gosh. I don't know if we want to continue on this card or if we should just move forward.
I think, in closing for this card, I think as much as you can say about morality, the big point that this card exists for in the context of it is to sow discord, sow doubt, and to try to convince you that it is as much, at the very least, as much in the right as it is in the wrong. It is trying to shove the choice onto you based on your own personal morality.
All right, T equals 0. I don't know whose turn it is to read, but I'm okay with reading this one.
Go at it.
Let's do it. T equals 0. We wrestled in the garden, in the loam of possibility where nothing existed and everything might. A shadowed agony among the flowers. We trampled the petals beneath our feet. We stomped the fruit to pulp. And we ground the seeds into dust. In the wet pop of grapes and the smear of berries and the perturbation of the field that was the garden before the first tick of time and the first point of space were the detonations that made the universes. Each universe was pregnant with its own inflammatory volumes and braided with ever ramifying timelines, each volume cooling and separating into domains of post-symmetric physics, all of which were incarnations of that great and all-dictating bipartial law that states only, exist lest you fail to exist. And still we fought. We brought down the tree of silver wings and left the stump to smoke amid the meadows. We left prints of our splayed feet and our straining backs in the clay. Our trampling feet made waves in the gardens, which were the fluctuations around which the infant universes coalesced their first structures. The dilation fields yawned beneath the existence. Symmetries snapped like glass, like creases, flaws in space-time collected filaments of dark matter that inhaled and kindled the first galaxies of suns. And still we grappled. Our rolling bodies pushed things out of the garden, worms and scurrying life from the fertile soil, wet things from the pools and the leaves. They came out into the madness of primordial space. They thrashed and became large. And I won. Because the gardener always stops to offer peace. And when they do, I always strike. But by then, it didn't matter. The game was over. The garden had given birth to creation. The rules were in place, and there would never be a second chance. We played in the cosmos now. We played for everything. And the patterns in the flowers, terrified by our contention, were no longer the inevitable victors of a game whose rules had suddenly changed, and they passed into the newborn cosmos to escape us. This is a very interesting I actually have more problems with this card than I do with P53, believe it or not. No comments. Awesome. I have more problems with the humanizing of the two characters in this one than I do with anything that happens in P53. It's just a very, very human, anthropomorphism of the two forces or the entities themselves, if they are indeed entities. And it may just be using the language to give us something to grasp as far as understanding the nature of the quote unquote battling or the wrestling within the garden. It does sound very much so like the idea of the Big Bang, right before it, the amount of tension there must have been within that moment before everything pushed out into the universe and the creation of the universes. The thing that I find interesting is that instead of a game of thought, this just basically is the laying of the flowers of the real game, the game of life. Thoughts?
I don't.
I know.
I don't have any.
Blue, in your notes, you had talked about the silver wings and what those might represent. So I wonder if you could just expand upon that.
Sure. Let me go find where in the notes I've put that, because I think I remember what you're talking about, but
because you mentioned them in the context of the subclass quests.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Because there's a subclass quest where we actually go. Gosh, where did I put that? We go and we collect the like literal feathers. I'm not able to find my own notes. That's really annoying. But no, yeah, there's Silver Wings, there's a connection because back in Vanilla D2 when we were first getting the was it D2 or was it Forsaken? Gee,
it was
it Forsaken when we were on the Tangled Shore in Io and we had to go run around and collect the feathers that every time you killed like a yellow bar, it like drops the feathers or anything like that, but they were silver feathers. And so that was like a weird connection that it was like, hang on, silver wings, silver feathers. Like that's an interesting thing. I'm really annoyed that I can't find my own notes. So that's how frustrated I am right now.
So, Green, while he's looking at that, I want to pick your brain on how the garden is kind of changing in this story, obviously, with the felling of the tree. And obviously there's a lot of people are drawing the parallels between this metaphorical garden and the Black Garden with that giant stump structure in the middle.
Right. So this is one of the things that really bugs me about this. If this is a more of a temporal garden, the thought garden, essentially, all these different things that are being described here, the stomping of the fruit to pulp, the seeds into dust, the wet pop of grapes and the smear of berries. It's just the idea with the tree of silver wings left the stump to smoke amid the meadows. It's, if that has any relation to the semi sort of trees we see on Io whenever we're getting our last subclass or whatnot, or whenever we're doing the subclass missions, I find that to be, I don't know if it's symbolic. It's something that really bugs me, because if it isn't symbolic, that means there was more than the concept of the thought prior. Or if it is just a thought, what is it representing? Is it just literally representing just a tree, or is it beyond that? Is it more than that? This is leading up to the concept of what we'll see in the Cambrian explosion, the idea of life springing forth, but this is the Big Bang. This is the creation of the building blocks. But in order to do that it shows that there's a somewhat destruction of something prior. And with that, the destruction of something prior is the ideas of the garden, the berries, the tree, all these different things. I don't know if I want to say that it's more than what it appears to be as far as the concepts. I don't know if I can. Symmetry snapped like glass, like creases flaws in space-time collected filaments of dark matter that inhaled and kindled the first galaxies of suns. It's as if one world's being turned inside out and into another. I don't know. I can't. I'm sorry. I wish I had a better answer. I don't even have an answer. I have a struggle.
Well, one thing that I personally was theorizing on through this, and obviously, like, my theories are not in any way like a final idea on what this could actually be, but we know that before the Black Heart was destroyed, the Black Garden was not tethered to Mars. So could these condensed parts of the garden in this book be... could the condensed parts of the garden in the book have become the actual physical Black Garden? Could this thought have become reality? Or
well, that's the question of what is the Black Garden then? Is the Black Garden this the location of power, such as what this is kind of you could interpret it as, or is it a location of an imitation of power of this? Is the Black Garden where the winnower and the gardener played, or is it the Vex's imitation of the flower game, which is actually more where I lean towards, that it is an interpretation of the Vex of this concept, not the actual original location.
I agree with you. Like, I definitely do see that the Black Garden could have been a Vex imitation. But somebody on Discord, I think it might have been Ghost, a while back when this card released, had talked about how the Vex found the garden, like it had already been there. And I don't know if anybody in chat knows that card, could link it. But
I remember reading the card of that, but if I remember correctly, that was written from not the Vex's perspective, but wasn't that from the Hive perspective? I'm trying to remember if that's from Books of Sorrow or not, or if that was from the books with Aldrin. Blue, do you have any idea?
I don't remember I don't remember that one. I know that, like, Ikora has a card where it like comments about how the Vex found it, but it's from Ikora's perspective. Like, and so, like, all the stuff that I can think of immediately off the top of my head is from someone else's perspective, saying, well, when they found it, and it's like, well, yeah. Like, I don't know if we, to be fair, also, I don't know if we have anything from the Vex perspective, to be really honest.
Yeah, there's really no personality within the Vex besides Kuria that we've ever seen.
Yeah, and then possibly the new, like, some of the minds, like Atheon has arguably, like, I'm not going to hang my hat too much on that, but, like, there seems to be some independent personality there. The Martyr Mind, I think, is the one that gets introduced with Saint 14, kind of seems to have a bit of a different subset. Korea does. I thought there was one more that I'm trying to... Undying. But even Undying kind of is like just a component. Like, it wasn't really... Like, that's the thing with the Vex, is like there's not really... The Vex are basically mini colonies already within them because the Radioria. So it's like... It's hard to say that there's a Vex that we would identify as an individual that is an actual individual, because they're not technically. They're components of like a hive structure, and it's not hive. Like it's like I love how I have to keep coming back to Halo. It's like the hunters from Halo. They're Logaku worms. They're colonies that operate in unison to create a massive character or a massive creature. But the Logoko or the Lekoko worms, like there's not the colony has an individual sense, but they're like, there's not like a, oh, that's Bob the hunter. Like it's, you know, it's not that.
It's a group. It's right, a group mind.
And that's kind of how I take the Vex, is that they're like sub-colonies within the overarching. And then you have the whole living metal component too, which is where you get like the idea of them being in a network mind also. So it's like it's even more kind of diluted. But yeah, Korea, and the only reason I would argue Korea has some individuality was because she was half taken, or it was half taken.
Yeah. Do you think, well, that's a whole nother debate I do not want to get into.
The Silver Wings, because I'm an idiot and I just forgot that I put it as a comment, not an actual part in the, so the interesting connection was the collection of silver feathers that we were tasked with during regaining of our subclass on Io. And the process was revolved around ridding silver trees of the taken blights that kept them from blooming. So as we would remove the taken blights, that would allow the trees to bloom, which was the connection that I was making there. I think that's the one you were talking about, Noble.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's a interesting inversion upon the roles that the flower game sets out, or, you know, we are winnowing the darkness in a sense.
And actually, I think, if anything, it's an indication that we are not following the rules. Because if the winnower is preventing a flower from blooming and we smack you smack the back of the hand and it's like, no, let it bloom, that breaks the game. Because the winnower is supposed to make the flowers not bloom. And so if we are...
No... It's not that he doesn't make the flowers bloom. He just enforces that not to. Right. He basically puts them back to sleep.
But that's what I'm saying is,
so if there's not one
in the quest to get our subclasses back, we are killing those blights, and once you kill the blights, the flowers bloom, or the trees bloom. So we are actively going and finding flowers, like air quotes there, flowers that have been winnowed and allowing them to bloom. And so we're like, it's a new component because the gardener has never been able to say, no, winnower, I don't want that one to not bloom. I want it to bloom. The only time that the gardener has been able to do anything is when it plants seeds. Once its seeds are planted, then that's it. That's when the game begins, and that's the winnower. The winnower gets the air quotes again, the next move, and then that's the final move. Like, the gardener doesn't get a chance to come back and touch plants that have already been planted.
Right, but the winnower only gets to affect the ones that follow the rules. It's not necessarily he gets to pick who he's doing that. Now, that's in the flower game. I don't think he gets to pick. He's following the rules according to the flower game. It's not until later that he creates it. He creates his own role as well. The gardener creates his own role. The winnower joins the gardener within the normal realm with that.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember if that was... Yeah, I'm trying to remember whether or not that was in... I can't... But
they had to follow their rules. That's why the gardener always lost the flower game.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And but again, it's like, is it really losing? Like, I mean, that's the whole question too. But Black Flag is also, it's paracausality. It's because we're sidestepping the process of the game rules.
Which is the gardener cheating.
Pretty much, yeah. It's chaos. Chaos versus order.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
we should move to the Cambrian explosion. We still have 4 more cards, guys.
Man. You want me to read this one?
Yep.
So this is the Cambrian explosion. Beings who deserve no thought. Those who peddle the tired gotcha that all life hastens entropy. They are fatuous little nihilists who pretend to prefer no existence to a flawed one. They bore me. Those who seek to delay the challenge that all things desiring existence must overcome. Those who describe false moral equivalence. Now, I could not possibly communicate with you unless I could emulate your mind, and with that mind I acquire the moralities that govern you. By your laws, I and all my followers are evil. Evil. Since that first molecule coiled in the primordial sea, not one earthborn thing has known a monster like me. But did you know that I created you? Your mind and your body and every thought you've ever had, your senses, your consciousness. I made you. Not the gardener, but I. Did I reach out and place my special mark upon you? No. Nothing so crude. In the beginning, your world was a garden too. The whole floor of the world's sea was a mat of bacteria, and the very first animals, adorable blobs of ooze, grazed upon that mat in endless idyll. They had no concept of the existence of other beings. Why would they? Their most complex function was a kind of gentle spasm to scoot forward while they grazed. And if they bumped into each other on that warm seabed, all they did was ooze onward untroubled. There was nothing to their life except the uptake of carbon compounds from the bacterial bed. Then, one day, the fall occurred. So much earlier and so much more necessary than your myths remember. Some poor mutant discovered that it could collect carbon compounds much faster if it stopped grazing on the bacterial mat and started dissecting and eating the lumps of predigested carbon all around it. Its neighbor oozeballs. It couldn't help but do it. It couldn't help but thrive. We don't get a choice about the rules. We just play the game. It was the first effector, the first predator. It changed everything. Now the oozeballs needed sensors to watch for danger, and brains to integrate those senses and generate plans of survival, and swift neurons and muscles to enact that plan. This was the Cambrian explosion, a great birth of complex life on your world. I caused it. I, the defector, the destroyer, the one who takes. Dirt plops.
Wicked's being goofy in chat. All right. The Destroyer.
I like it. I mean, like, it reminds me of Ghost Fragment Darkness 3.
Right. It's the forced evolution.
It's not even a forced evolution.
It's just natural.
Though right. It does say so much earlier. Well, no, it doesn't. Yeah, I was like, it does say so much earlier, but no, it's not forced. It's just he's just making a note that it's not what your myths are saying.
Right. So the idea of this, that the winnower isn't necessarily, it's making another comparison to the idea that the winnower is a part of natural order, not necessarily an aggressor, but part of the natural evolution of things. The quote unquote mutant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the question there is like, and this is where like my brain immediately goes to next is, okay, so there's a mutant that discovered it could collect carbon. What mutated it? Was it just a natural mutation, or did the winnower like bump it? You know,
there would have to be some sort of like not necessarily a P53, but some sort of glitch in the system. Something that pushes it, I guess, if you do want to go that route.
Again, was that an orchestrated glitch, or was that just a natural, like there's a difference between mutations that happen naturally and then genetically, you know, like genetic drift and stuff like that, or if it's like a preordained crossbreeding that allowed for the mutation. Like, you know, like that's where I guess my brain is.
Right. I think it's more
if it's a random mutation,
the idea that it's, well, that's the comparison to the natural force of things. He is the natural, in some ways, even though he is order, he's also a bit of chaos in that this pushed it into a totally different. Now, granted, this is also an imperfect metaphor.
But I mean, if you back, and this is where like the scope of the picture also matters, because if you back far enough away, even those things are, the end is inevitable. Like the thing is like, that's the thing, is entropy for our existence, for mortal existence, entropy is an inevitable component that is always going to be there. So, like, if you take a big enough step
but is the idea
back,
right? But is the winnower entropy? That's the question. Is the winnower the one that pushes you off to the other side? So it's the natural force of it again. And that's the problem is that basically the writer is having to again and again and again try to explain these concepts of this is a force that pushed you just slightly. There was not necessarily a malevolence behind it because there wasn't you can't necessarily assign that to it. It was pushing because that is what it does. It's not evil. It is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's, yeah. Well, and I mean, kind of to segue into the next one too, real quick, also is, talking about patterns, right? If you step back far enough, you get a pattern. Do you guys want to read Patternfall, or did you have anything else about the Cambrian explosion, I guess, before?
Noble?
I think one of the interesting parts of this is how he seems to be taking something from you with this lore tab. He's trying to claim you in this. But did you know I created you? Your mind and your body and everything, every thought you've ever had, your senses, your consciousness. I made you, not the gardener, but I. That's just, again, part of his argument, and the whole book that he's trying to pull you to him. I think that was my big takeaway from that.
Real quick, also, the Cambrian explosion, just historically, was the event that approximately about 545 million years ago was when most of the fossils, the major animal fossils, kind of appeared in the fossil records. And it's also where, like, I think they said that's where it's the result in the divergence of most modern, I think it's Metazoan phyla. So it's a rather important little thing that happened, because it's basically when first major groups of animals first appeared. So, and it was also in the scope of life on Earth, it actually happened in a relatively short time, which is why it's called the Cambrian explosion, even though it lasted 13 to 25 million years. So, but Patternfall, real quick. So we're talking about the difference between the winnower and the gardener, and the question about the hive. Patternfall actually kind of nods to this.
Noble, do you want to read this one?
Sure. The patterns that escaped the garden landed in the water. Of course, there was no water at first. The patterns were abstract waves tumbling through the fire of the early universe, trapped in chaos, cycling through the desperate self-preservation tautologies, while vast beings from beyond the narrow dominion of cause and effect thrashed and battled around them. For an eon they were nothing but screaming equation vermin, scurrying through the quantum foam, fleeing ultimate erasure. But they were tenacious. They propagated in the saline meltwater of comets orbiting the first stars. That broth of chemicals became their substrate, and they learned to catalyze impossible chemistry with quantum tricks. Then they rained from the sky into the steaming seas of fallow worlds, and there they built their first housings from geometry and silica. In all their transformations, they retained that kernel of ultimate self-sufficiency that had made them victors in the flower game. But they are not incontrovertibly destined to rule this cosmos. They were made before the light and the darkness, but the rules are different now, and even this pattern must adapt. They are not all mine, not in the way that admirers such as my man Oryx are mine, utterly devoted to the practice of my principle, but some of them have, nonetheless, found their way home.
This card bothers me for just that last line.
with you there.
It explains why they have problems with understanding the geometry of the spaces.
Are you... Wait, I mean, no. Like, are you saying that as, like, a legit argument on this one? Because literally the only thing that bothers me is the voice of my man Oryx. It just... I cannot read that without saying, they're not all mine. Not in the way that admirers such as my man Oryx are mine. I have a hard time not reading it any other way.
I totally agree with you. That is so Drifter-esque in the way it's written.
It's just a different voicing than what we've gotten used to. But, Blue, you have a more serious thing than we did on that one. What was going on?
So the Vex, this explains why the Vex have issues with the geometry of spaces within the Books of Sorrow, because it says they are not incontrovertibly destined to rule the cosmos. They were made before light and darkness, but the rules are different. So their pattern must adapt as them when they were brought forth and they didn't understand the geometry of the throne world. They're having to learn the geometry of each space now afterwards. And so that's where you kind of get the thing. This also gives a nod to what we talked about a little bit with Aspect, with the discomfort that the Vex have with the, I can't remember which one it is, but the Black Garden Vex, because I'm assuming those are the ones that have
soul progeny,
have, quote, found their way home. Was it soul divisive? I think, I don't know.
Soul progeny. Soul progeny.
The one with the plants on it. Excuse me.
Yep, the progeny.
The ones that we just spent 3 months killing.
The one that Undying Mind is technically part of too, by the way.
Yep. But yeah, no, that's what I took away from there. Was like, oh, this explains why the Vex had problems with like understanding stuff.
Okay. I don't know if I want to go in. I don't think I have anything else for that card. Nobleman?
One thing that bugged me about this, and maybe y'all can help me process a thought on it, is they were made before the light and darkness. That these physical creatures existing outside of the timeline being there before the light and the darkness whose conflict supposedly created them. That inconsistency really bothers me.
Well, I don't think it's at no standpoint
I don't think that's an inconsistency.
It's at no point stated that they were physical before. It says the patterns that escaped the gardens landed in the water. So again, we go back to the concept of, is the light and darkness the unmoved mover? Because the rules of the flower garden were around before they were, and the patterns are the rules. And so you kind of have like this weird coalescence of, again, three-way war between light, darkness, and the other. And so this is kind of almost pointing to the fact that the Vex might be the other two. Like, you know, there's a component that could be that way as well. But then the ending actually causes a little bit of confusion, because then the winnower claims ownership of them. So, like, I always took it as the Vex were the patterns that enacted the rules of the flower garden or the flower game. They weren't necessarily sentient, but then when they got released, they escaped, however they did. They gained the degree of sentience and developed into the Vex. But originally they were like agents of the winnower within the game that was the flower game. It would be like if in the game of life, the logarithm that says, you know, these rules must be followed somehow made the leap into our reality. If that makes sense.
Sorry, I'm trying to process. It does. I'm trying to process a part of what you said of... You mentioned that the Vex are, if they're enacting the winnower's aspect, but there's part of the Vex that do that, yes, but there's also part of the Vex that enacts the gardener's aspect, too.
But if you're seeing them as the logarithm of the game, that would make sense. Because the gardener inputs their command, and then the winnower...
It's just a computer.
Right. Yeah.
It's a computer following the rules.
Deep Mind and from Hitchhiker's
right. Guide. Oh, God. Deep Mind, but way, way scarier.
The answer is 42.
Oh, God. Okay. Jeez. Okay, skipping ahead. We're going to go to the wager because we are on a real tear on this one. So, the wager. Your shoemaker philosopher was right, and it matters more than anything. Sorrow cannot survive death, and it cannot precede birth. Those who exist have moral worth, and those who do not have none. Think about it. Do you mourn the uncreated? Do you grieve for those who were never born in a nation that never developed around an ideology no one ever imagined on a continent that never formed? No. And from that self-evident truth, you must raise your eyes to the ultimate revelation. Those who cannot sustain their own claim to existence belong to the same moral category as those who have never existed at all. Existence is the first and truest proof of the right to exist. Those who cannot claim and hold existence do not deserve it. This is the true and only divination, a game whose losers are not just forgotten, but are never born at all. That which cannot claim and hold existence is not real. You do not mourn the unreal. Why should you care for it, tend it, guard it? It was the gardener that chose you from the dead. I wouldn't have done that. It's just not in me. But now that they have invested themselves in you, you are incredibly, uniquely special. That wandering refugee chose to make a stand, spend their power to say, here I prove myself right. Here I wager that, given power over physics and the trust of absolute freedom, people will choose to build and protect a gentle kingdom ringed in spheres, and not to fall to temptation, and not to surrender to division, and never yield to the cynicism that says everyone else is so good that I can afford to be a little evil. The gardener is all in. They are playing for keeps, and they are wrong. Or so I argue. For, after all, the universe is undecidable. There is no destiny. We're all making this up as we go along. Neither the gardener nor I know for certain that we're internally universally right, but we can be nothing except what we are. You have a choice. You are the gardener's final argument. It would mean everything if I could convince you that I am the right and only way. I truly value you. To the gardener, you are a means to an end. To me, you are majestic. Majestic. You are full of the only thing worth anything at all. I am, by the only standard that matters or will ever matter, the winning team. Existence is a test that most will fail. Would you not count yourself among the victorious few? Don't hurry to deliver your answer. I'll come over and hear it myself. Dun dun dun. I mean, this is the wager, that it's a pretty straightforward card as to what the winner is doing.
And so my problem with this card is actually from the structure of it, not actually there's a couple of questions I have about the content, but it's interesting to me because here when it mentions the gardener, that is talking about the traveler. However, it is not the gardener. It's not capitalized. And I'm like, and that's where my brain starts being like, okay, I'm trying really hard not to overthink that. But everything in the text within Destiny, there's really weird things about if it's capitalized, it's one thing. If it's not capitalized, it's another. And so that's where my brain immediately is like, okay, but the avatar of the gardener picked you, or what is going on there? But then later in the thing, it's the gardener again, and the gardener again is not capitalized. So I go back and forth on this. Is why I'm still not decided on whether or not the traveler and the triangle ships are actually the gardener and the winnower. or if they're just the physical manifestations of them, and there's actually separation between the two.
As far as like I don't know if you would actually call it syntax or whatnot for this, but with the gardener being not capitalized, I think it's referring to the traveler because it's not the force, it's the avatar.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was. That's how I read it, but I'm like, but here, I mean, I will 100% say I am. Well, I would like 99%. I'm very convinced that when it says the gardener chose you from the dead, it is talking about the traveler choosing, or the ghost and the traveler.
Now, here's a fun little thought game to play. If the gardener lowercase is the traveler and the winnower is talking to us, but it's not the winnower prime or not the force of the winnower, it's the avatar of the winnower, is there a possibility of either, because they are part of the fallible world, of either of them being corrupted? We saw that with the Traveler in the EDZ with the corrupted shard.
And there's also, like, the other thing to keep in mind is back in the back corners of Destiny lore, we have the deep, we have the sky, and there is actually another thing that's called the Formless One. And so, like, there's a couple potential, like, steps in a hierarchy that could be still reiterated there. The other thing that I have a problem with is like this character that's writing this is all about like, oh, well, it's inevitable, blah, 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 blah. And then you get to this thing. It's like, oh, well, there is no destiny. We're making it up as we go along. I'm like, okay, make up your mind. Like, is this based on the flower game and, you know, we're cheating the rules, or is this free will? And like, from a debate standpoint, that's very frustrating to me.
Well, I think there's the aspect of free will because we are able to cheat and exit the game because of the paracausality of it.
And I agree. I do agree that the Guardians or the Risen present a sidestepping of the rules. I get that. But what the winnower here says is that, for after all, the universe is undecidable. There is no destiny. We're all making this up as we go along.
Right. And I think that's the truth of the matter because of exactly what the gardener and the winnower represent. The fact that there is a given pool and chance and everything, and the fact that there was the quote-unquote winnower's chance of changing the ooze, the ooze monster or the slug dirt, essentially at the bottom of the sea. Yeah,
so,
the dirt.
So you're thinking like the wrestling in the garden basically was the fall of the winnower in the garden, or I gotcha. I'm following with that. Okay, I can see that. And then he's going to come and visit us.
What do you Yeah, Nobleman, do you have any more thoughts on the wager?
I think there's obviously a certain amount of meta commentary about there is no destiny. We're making this up as we go along. And I think that is very interesting when taken outside of the game, is that destiny is going to evolve with the players, and, you know, there could be a completely different ending down the road than what is currently being envisioned. There really is no telling what's going to happen.
Right. You know, as far as like stepping outside of the story of the game, that is the beauty of how this game has evolved. I was actually talking about this with one of my friends, of how the story of Destiny was never predetermined necessarily to the exact ending that we're going to get to. There was an idea there, obviously, but how we get there and how the stories have evolved, how the details have evolved, have changed depending on who's writing and what the community is interested in. All that has affected it because it is in itself a living universe, because we are, this is going to be a weird metaphor for me, but the player base is the winnower in the aspect of the creation of Destiny. We're the ones helping drive where it goes. Now, ultimately, it's the devs that are going to decide where it ends up, but we help shape it. And I think that is the most poetic thing I've ever compared Destiny to, and I am quite proud of it. Blue?
Yeah, I'm getting so tired. Let's do Trust and Hope.
Okay. I call Nodded on reading it.
I can read it. I like this one.
Okay.
It says, Friend, over the past 5 years, we Lightbearers, you Lightbearers, have grown strong. Each victory opens more territory for searching ghosts and more guardians rise. None of these newborn contenders are mighty without equal, but you have been at the forefront again and again. To see you fall would be disastrous, and there are so many ways to fall. It has become fashionable lately to analyze light and darkness as if they were political opponents, each with something to offer us. Some guardians even take secret names to mark their transgressions. I despise this flirtation, but I cannot speak against it. After all, I have had to find my own pathways to power. Thus, I asked my queen, who has preached a doctrine of balance, if she truly believed in the equal worth of light and dark. The Awoken were made in conflict, she reminded me. All her people volunteered to return from heaven to fight and die in the cosmic war. They are by nature and by doom drawn to that edge, that place of tension. And she has her own prejudices. She has made terrible, ruthless choices in the name of salvation from darkness, so she cannot dismiss its power without in a way dismissing herself. All that said, she told me, I believe in balance, but to seek balance is to not seek equity. A sea half of water and half of poison is not in balance. A body half alive and half dead is not in balance. Given the choice to live in any world at all, we would need a little darkness in it, I think, to keep the balance true. But not so much as we would need the light. What do you think, Eris Morn? When you went into that pit, your light against the clawing darkness, did you feel balance? No, I did not. I felt overwhelming, all-consuming evil. I think a world of balance would fight the darkness because darkness unchecked is darkness thriving. I think that a world of balance would never mistake the excitement of transgression or the grim necessity of trespass for a genuinely righteous act. We must remember the value of unshakable, irrational hope. The choice to act as if we lived in a better world can create a place for that better world to exist. I do not think that a good guardian can even for a moment entertain the darkness. This is a power that has devoured worlds beyond knowing, a power that has practiced its appeals against entire Zeta lives. There is no defense against it except to avoid the battle entirely. It is a sign of self-respect, Ariana always said, to fearlessly question our deepest beliefs. But it will always be rank foolishness to leap into a vat of plutonium salt and call it self-exploration. And to tempt your friends into that vat with you? That is evil. Thank you for being so worthy of trust. Thank you for carrying my hope. Eris.
Confirmation that Toland is evil. Thank you very much. Have a good night. We will catch you next week. And by the way, Marasov is actually quite wise, so thank you very much. I am an Awoken hunter, and I will catch you next week. No, in all seriousness, I do like this card because it does show a little bit more to Mara's thinking as far as Mara talking with Eris about this, and Mara's thinking about the idea of balance and her own thoughts on it, and I find it very refreshing to have that perspective from her, given that Eris, with how dark her character has gotten and the all-consuming dread that she feels with a lot of the different things that have been going on in not only her life, but just in relation to the hive and everything. It's nice to see that somebody has comforted her in at least their own truth.
I just love
in what they believe.
The depth that this brings to Eris. Like the entire Shadowkeep, like Age of the Undying or Season of the Undying has really brought Eris out, and like she's gotten a lot more depth as far as like how she's dealt with the trauma, and I really like how they've done that. But this card right here, I really, really do like from her. Like, I think this is a culmination of the healing that Eris has gone through, and her own interpretation of what that is and like what it should be. And this is coming from someone who has experienced that darkness.
Yeah. So here's something I want to bring to your attention as a pure metagamer. This card comes out after the cutscene where Eris approaches the statue.
What are your thoughts on that cutscene? I mean, there's so many ways to interpret that.
Right, and that's the problem. We have no context. We don't know what Eris gleaned from that experience.
Right, and I think I find it interesting though that if this comes out after that cutscene.
Oh, it absolutely does.
Sorry. I'm sorry that came out. I meant because it comes out. Sorry, that was me poorly wording something.
Mm-hmm. The implications.
With it coming out after the cutscene and this being so strongly worded against being tempted by the darkness, and then this is included in the ending of the Unveiling book. Like there's a lot of I wouldn't say mixed messages really, because it's not quite that. It paints in a couple of different ways what is trying to be said here. Because like I appreciate what Eris is saying here on the surface, because this is kind of along the lines of what I would assume to be my personal approach to things. Like I like what's being said here because this speaks to actually me personally.
Right. But here's something I want everybody to remember. We don't know what happened to Eris at the statue. Right. What it looks like is one thing, but the thing that actually happened, we still do not know.
Correct.
Now, was Eris actually quote unquote tempted by the dark or consumed by something from the dark or had communed with the dark? That paints, like Blue was saying, this card in a very different light. Maybe there's something else that happened. I don't think we can assign one way or the other.
That being said, though, we do have the letter that she wrote to Mara after. And
where she doesn't actually send it?
She doesn't actually send it, but it is kind of a reconciliation. Like, it's kind of a confession of, I'm thinking like a Christian concept of confession. Like, it's like her kind of bearing her sins, basically, and saying, look, I tripped, I stumbled. And that's really what it is the reconciliation kind of concept. So like that being now I'm curious when in the time frame of Eris's, writing stuff, where that would fall. Because we know that both of those happened after the pyramid event. And so, because to me, when I read the letter that she didn't send to Mara, which, I mean, the sending or not sending, I don't put a lot of weight on that, because I can, whatever. But the content that's in it was very, to me, it was very like she's acknowledging she made a mistake. And that to me would, if she had written that before she wrote this letter, then that puts a different flavor on this letter. Now,
absolutely.
I'm not 100% sure if I would say, again, you're right. We don't know her inner workings and her, like, what she experienced. So I don't know that if she wrote this letter before she wrote the reconciliation letter, I don't know if that actually changes the flavor in my mind, really. But the fact that both of those exist means that I kind of take this to be more accurate to the surface of what is being said than a type of reverse psychology, or, because I could see someone putting an argument out that it's Eris trying to trick us into letting her get all the power, and then, to basically don't pursue that. That's a very dangerous thing. And then she takes it and runs. I've seen that trope in a lot of things. I don't get the feeling that that's what's happening here. I get the feeling that Eris is like, look, I made the mistake of going and taking that step, And, what does she say? She says, like, where was it? It would always be rank foolishness to leap into a vat of plutonium salt. And then she goes further and she says, and to tempt your friends into that vat with you, that is evil. And then she says, thank you for your trust. And so to me, the way I read that is like, she's like, I was the fool, but I am not. She's trying her best to not be evil. And so she is trying to warn us against that temptation.
Right.
That's how I've kind of read this, and that's why I kind of like it. Now, whether or not that's what's intended, that's up to interpretation.
I mean, she admits right here she has had to find her own pathways to power.
And she has. I mean, she also acknowledges that she no longer considers herself a light bearer.
Right.
Which still bugs me, but whatever.
I mean, she's not wielded the light.
We know
she's wielded that
I guess that also that's a bigger question. That's a bigger topic too, because that depends on your definition of what the light is. Does the light only come from the traveler, or does it come from just existence?
Right, but what do the hive spells incorporate? Is it? I mean, that's where you're going to have that.
Yeah. There's a lot of.
There's
right.
Lots of debate.
That's an entirely different 2-hour podcast.
Yep. Should we do final thoughts on it?
Yes.
Nobleman, you have the stage, good sir.
All right. This whole book is just it calls everything into question, morality and P53 in particular, and it gets you to really think about how much can you trust what is being told to you. Can you really side with the light or the darkness? I think the full philosophical point of view in this book is very interesting going forward, and that it ends on this semi-hopeful note that you've still got friends and light there to back you up. It's a very powerful point.
Mm-hmm. It is. I think that this book is very much so propaganda, hoping to convince others to question. And I think that is a good thing. I do think that diving into the questions more and debating it more is important for us as guardians, and for just the whole concept of, we've toyed with the idea of playing with the dark with Drifter's game. We've toyed with the idea of it with Shin / Veil within the shadows. And so this is taking another step into our own examination of it. Now, whether or not guardians do examine it and kind of go into a philosophical debate of what is going on, that's neither here nor there. That's up to each person individually. But the cards that we have that are supposedly the voice of the winnower speaking to us, and then the addition of Eris at the end, bringing up the concept of hope and how important it is to foster the idea of hope within a society so that that idea can come to light. It's just another part of Destiny kind of hitting on that overtone, I guess, rather. That music of the sphere, if we're going to go right back around and go back to the beginning of the introduction episode. Blue?
No, I think that's, yeah. I think that this is, it's a glimpse into the frustrations of biased presentations. I think that, as you probably can tell, we have differing opinions, and I think that's the point, is that everyone's going to read this in a different light. And I think that's the point. I really do. I think that's the highlighting factor that's being here. And, you know, the lore writers on Bungie's team have long been very big proponents on the concept of the power of bias and the illusion of having the full picture when you really only have a fragment of it is something that they are very, very talented at using. And I think that this is, for those of us who have been doing this since the, you know, pretty much inception of Destiny, or just been doing this for a long time, very steeped in it, this is, in a way, and I don't mean this negatively, this is the same concept that we've always been dealing with. The nice thing about this particular book is that it presents us a new perspective. Not that perspective is less biased than the other perspectives, but it gives us a better picture of what's actually going on, which is something to keep in mind. You know, we're going to be seeing, I think, more of this especially with the doubling down of like putting stories inside gameplay instead of inside text. I think that's going to be very prevalent too. So it just, to me, as frustrating as it is to read some of these entries, I think that ultimately it gives us a new perspective that gives us a clearer picture of what is actually going on. And I appreciate that.
Do we want to do shout outs again kind of thing? Or like,
let's do, if you are still listening, let's do some shout outs real quick. Noble, what do you got for us?
I want to shout out to my fire team, and you guys, and like all the lore community that's really brought me into wanting to dive into discussions like this. The wonderful writers at Bungie and my teachers in college who've helped me to relate what I'm reading in the game to real things in the world to gain that deeper dive as well.
Nice.
Absolutely.
Green, what about you?
I like challenging books like this, so I'm going to kind of second his statement on that and just be a big thank you and shout out to pushing ideas, pushing the boundaries of what is acceptable and easy reading, and causing debates like this, and actually getting Blue and I to argue. We don't do that terribly often anymore, it seems.
I think that you're right on the thing. Is like, I mean, without having difficult conversations, we don't grow.
Absolutely.
So, you know, as much as it frustrates, or as, you know, whatever, ultimately there's nothing. Truth is discovered by the arguments of friends, or between the arguments between friends, is one of the quotes that I really like. I think it was David Hume. And I think that this podcast has always been that source of that argument between friends. So giving us fuel for those arguments, I think, is never going to not be appreciated. And just in my opinion. But sorry, Green, I didn't mean to jump in there.
No, you're good. I'm okay with that. As far as housekeeping, shout out type things, remember that on January 3rd, we're going to have Man at Arms with us and doing basically a Let's Party kind of discussion, aka we're letting Man at Arms on the show, so it's going to be a party. But beyond that, Happy New Year to you guys when you get there. I hope your holidays have been great, and we will see you in 2020.
And as always, goodbye. With that, we'll begin to wrap the chat up. Thank you again to those over on Twitch for coming to spend your evening with us. If you'd like to join us for the live streaming of the episodes, please be sure to give us a follow over on twitch.tv/FocusFireChat. Links to all our episode archives can be found at www.thelorenetwork.com. Please be sure to email us at focusfirechat@gmail.com with any comments and or questions for the team concerning the podcast, and let us know how we're doing by giving us some feedback and a rating over on iTunes as well. So until next time, focus your fire and may your light shine bright.